Birmingham's in a unique position right now. There's 3 potentially massive projects that could all come online. Don't buy a building hoping that it'll appreciate. Buy a building and force appreciation, right? Do something to actually add value to the building.
Welcome to the Beyond Wealth podcast. Sam Zoldock.
Thanks
Glad
for
to
having
have
me.
you here, man.
Yeah, man.
It was interesting because I reached out to you and it took a little while for you to get back. You were preoccupied with a honeymoon.
I was on my honeymoon.
I said that's a legit reason to not.
It's a great reason not to be here.
So congratulations. Where'd y'all go?
We went to St. Lucia.
Okay.
Shout out to Sandals.
Yeah, man. Dude, I bet that was incredible.
It was awesome. St. Lucia's a beautiful country. We could do everything. They have 3 resorts there, so you could go to all 3 resorts and play and eat and just go around. So we did that. It was an amazing time.
I love it. Was it all-inclusive?
Yep.
Dude, there's something about the all-inclusive. I don't know what it is, but you're just like, I don't have to worry about my choices like money. I'm like sometimes too much of a penny pincher. And so the all-inclusive thing for me is like a stress reliever more than like I'm always getting, 5 beers,
Yeah. A honeymoon is the hardest trip for me to plan because there's no risk reward. Like if we were going on a skiing trip, like you and I were going to go, we'd be like, hey, let's get this Airbnb. It might be a little like we don't know how it's going to be, but it's got this hot tub. It's got this ski in, ski out. Like it's kind of a gamble, right?
Right.
But on a honeymoon, there's no risk reward to taking a gamble. Like if I was like, hey, I found this cool Airbnb in St. Lucia, like it could be a dump. And we just spent like our whole honeymoon in a dump.
Yeah.
Or like I could be like, hey, we're going to this all-inclusive like resort that their whole job is to tailor honeymoon experiences.
Yeah, make it awesome.
Yeah.
It's a high-risk game you didn't want to play with.
Yeah, it is not worth it.
That's awesome. Well, you are in the commercial space, and I know Nolan connected us and wanted to have you in to talk about everything that is commercial brokerage, how you find properties. We connected because, one of the funny things offline we were talking, I think we're both realists. There's a lot of people who underwrite properties and just are dreamers, and it's not bad to be a little bit of a dreamer, but sometimes the numbers just don't make sense. And I think some people who got a little too crazy are really in pain right now.
Oh yeah.
And I'm a little conservative. I'm almost to the point where sometimes I don't do deals, but I would rather err on the side of being cautious than like just crazy and then it bite me in the butt. So all that to say is I was like, as you were talking about, I was like, dude, we are the same. Like I'm conservative, I'm really cautious, but I think it served me well.
Yeah.
And so you're with Collier International. You guys have done like, in 2022 when things were hopping, you guys did over $1 billion in revenue or in sales.
Yeah.
Talk me through a little bit about your background. I know you work with a lot of people in those spaces, and then specifically kind of the niches that you work with.
Yeah, so we've got an in-house fund called Own Alabama, which is about a $30 million commercial real estate private equity fund that I help steward, and I do acquisitions, help raise capital for them. And then on top of that, I just am a general commercial real estate broker, and I've done over $20 million in sales volume myself, everything from self-storage to industrial to retail, kind of agnostic to what it is, just trying to add value to clients. And, what we find is there's a lot of people out there who are like, hey, I want to invest in commercial real estate, right? And they're like, I've got $100,000, even up to maybe $1 million. And I'm like, man, that's a lot of money, right? But do you know who to call? Like when your tenant blows out, you're going to be pissed when I sell you a building and then your tenant blows out in 2 years and you're like, man, I got to pay you again to release this thing. Like, and then it's going to sit vacant. You're going to pay your note. And so we found for the fund specifically that like these, still high net worth guys it makes more sense for them to just invest in the fund and let us do what we do best, right? Let us be the active manager. So then you're not, and most people think like, oh, well, I can change the toilet. That's like not what we're talking about. We're buying 100,000 square foot buildings, right? Like we're releasing to, triple B corporate rated, tenants. And then you've got what I call like your, kind of not ultra high net worth, but you're definitely high net worth. You're 5 to 25 million kind of guys who have either sold their business or sold a portfolio of real estate or have a cash cow and are kind of like chairman, kind of CEO, but maybe stepped away from their business. And they're like, hey, I want to actively invest. And then that's where I kind of target to work with them. I'm like, okay, how do we add value? How do we identify off-market properties for you? Or how do we come in with you and help you buy them, right? Like they're like, hey, my buddy owns this building. Can you help me take this down?
Yeah.
Because it's a relationship game at the end of the day.
Yeah, that's incredible. And we were talking, there's been a lot of different stories, just kind of some funny, some interesting projects you've worked on. Talk me through that one deal with the aquifer. That was really interesting.
So one of the things that I've kind of specialized on over the past few years is self-storage. And one of the industry, I guess, value add deals that self-storage guys look for is converting like old retail centers or old retail properties into self-storage. So think about it, it's a retail store or like a shopping center is wide open on the inside. Take out all the shelves, all that, and then you put in storage units. And they're super secure. It keeps costs low if you can buy it right on a per cost basis. And then you really just have to add in like sprinklers and other little infrastructure compared to something else. And so we were gonna buy this antique mall up in Gardendale and convert it to self-storage. Well, one of the things, we were looking at it, we did a demographic study, we did all this. My client was fired up about the deal. He owns more up there, so this would just be like a play. He had tenants to push to it. And we finished the model like late at night one night. And we're like, dude, this is a minimum $1 million carry. Like when you see you're going to make $1 million in one check, like on a very conservative financial model, you're like, your eyes kind of open.
You're like, sign the contract.
Yeah.
Let's do this.
Let's get this going.
Yeah.
I just don't think those opportunities come around to make like that type of money in one deal. And the very next morning, we get a call from the owner, and he's like, hey, so there's another side to this story. And we're like, what the heck? You're
like, I'm going to make $2 million.
Yeah. Like, you're going to give me the property. He had built a wall to hide 30,000 gallons of moving water through the building because the building was built on an aquifer.
Wow.
Now, there's not like a Google SEO optimized, like, we are aquifer specialists, call us.
Yeah.
Because how many people have you ever talked to about an aquifer? Probably nobody. So I hop on the horn and I call, my 15 closest, more experienced real estate people. And I'm like, have you ever dealt with an aquifer? All of them are like, good luck. Sounds like very scary. Self-storage and water don't really go together.
Yeah.
And so what I like to say to folks is there's deals you earn on and there's deals you learn on. And sometimes the best deals, as you know, are the ones you don't do because you get in that competitive bidding war and they're like, oh, I can pay this or I can pay this. It's like, man, Home Depot's not going to change their price for you to go like buy building materials. Like your contractor, just because you overpaid, isn't going to lower his price, right? And so that was definitely one we learned on and could have earned on, but didn't because, we were like, how do you overcome an aquifer? I know a guy in town, though, who developed the Walmart out in Irondale. And he ended up that land was built on an aquifer as well. And he ended up figuring out the aquifer, being able to tap into it, and he sold it for $1 bajillion.
That's crazy.
And I'm like, that's somebody who knows how to add some value.
Yeah. That's the interesting thing about commercial and playing in that space is there is potentially what it's used for, but oftentimes it's not the best case use. And if you can find that margin and opportunity, which I know we'll talk about some more of your deals, the pivots, taking the antique store, which probably wasn't producing that much as an antique store, but could be converted to storage, even though you didn't do the deal. We'll say there was no aquifer, then it was $1 million spread,
Yeah,
right?
I mean,
and it's just because it wasn't buying this business and then converting it to just a different business. It was literally rearranging the whole building to be a totally different case use.
yeah, finding the highest and best use is like probably why I get out of bed in the morning, because it's so entertaining to go see what somebody's currently using the property for.
Yeah.
Like the building we're in, right? It's a retail center, and we're in the basement in a podcast room, right?
Yeah.
It's like, who would have thought that, you could take if you just rented out basement space, like just as office, it's probably going to get lower rent. But you make it black and cool for a podcast, now that rent's going up, right?
Yeah.
So there's all sorts of creative ways to add value or create that margin or that spread that, is maybe different than residential.
Yeah.
Like residential is like, okay, I'll live here. I've looked at crazy things too, though, in residential. Like, how do you convert like old country churches to houses?
Yeah.
Because you can normally buy those things for like $40,000.
Yeah.
It's like, okay, I wonder if I could. They've got plumbing.
Could you
in
build it out?
Yeah, could you build it
that's
out as a house?
Yeah, kind of similar to, I've seen some people do, like, they'll just literally build a warehouse because of like, and then they'll put a house inside.
Yeah, like the barn-dominium.
Yes, thank you, barn-dominium.
Yeah.
Like concept is like, just come over building costs is just a different way of building the structure on the exterior, but you build out whatever you want on the interior. I also think too, like, have you dealt with any, condoizing, like, separating out units and making them all condos, or, because that's another way that you can also like leverage different mortgages on each of those condo units,
Yeah.
And fund it differently even.
So that's funny you asked that. I've got a client who is like, he thinks he's going to go buy like a big, 100-unit multifamily complex. And he's like, I'm going to condo out 20 of the units and then sell the rest and like keep those for myself. And I'm like, dude, that's what kills value. People try to like go in and condo. That was like a thing, was multifamily to condo conversions, like back in the 2000s. Like that was like the hot thing before the market exploded, obviously. But then post the market exploding, the thing was, how do I go buy all the condos and turn it back into multifamily? So people made money on both sides of it. Right now, I would think the general consensus is like, we don't want to condo stuff. I know some townhouse developers who like have done it with townhouse product and they've killed it though.
Right. It depends on the class.
Yeah.
And I think there's also like, because obviously you got HOAs involved and stuff, and not all HOAs are created equal.
Yeah.
So I actually did a deal for a client where they bought a condo, like townhome thing, and there was an HOA, but the HOA was like almost impossible to get a hold of. And if you really dive into it deep, no one would lend on these condos because their books were just a mess.
Yeah.
And so it had to be a cash deal. So he bought it on the front end thinking like we could traditionally finance it. And like, I learned after the fact, once again, the deals you make, you learn on versus earn on, learn on versus earn on. I learned after the fact that like, I was like, dude, we can only sell this to a cash buyer. And luckily we did. We found a cash buyer, but all of those have to trade in cash, which ultimately, when you limit your financing options, what does it do? Lowers the price.
Yeah. When you limit, I like to try to, when we're selling a property, make sure that we can sell it to as many possible buyers, right? That's what I think was so interesting, like about the brewery trend that helped up the prices of industrial real estate, is because you had these brewers, these frat guys come out of UGA or whatever. They're like, I'm going to open a brewery, right?
Yeah.
And this happened a lot in Atlanta. They're like, oh, I could go, I can put a bigger shop in an industrial space. And an industrial user is just like, they're just trying to ship widgets, right?
Right.
Versus like this brewery is trying to entertain people. And so you've got all these breweries now in like these industrial parks. It doesn't make sense, but it was for them kind of a creative, and that helped push up some of the value of industrial real estate.
Interesting. Because they were on the front end, they were thinking the creative way, and now it's like, well, this could also be a brewery and they're going to pay X, or
they can pay up for it.
talk me through, the commercial space, leasing, all that kind of stuff, very different than residential. So residential, you're expecting year, maybe 2-year leases. I think the benefit, the flip side of residential is like that is someone's home. So the likelihood that they're going to pay that rent is a little bit higher, I think, in some case uses. The negative is obviously there's not necessarily income directly related to supply that, rent justification. But in commercial space, we got triple net leases. You have longer terms. What are some of those expectations when you're renting a building to find tenants that they're going to agree to XYZ terms? Like, what are those typical, at least the target, and maybe you shift left or right of that, but what's the typical, like, we're trying to hit this marker on term lease, all that kind of stuff?
Yeah. So that game has changed in the past 4 years. So the name of the game, probably prior to old Sleepy Joe being in office, was long-term lease, 3% bumps, just keeping up with inflation, maybe a little bit above it. If they're targeting 2% inflation, you're getting a 3% bump. And how long can we lock you in for, right? Well, post 2020, construction prices skyrocket. Everything has just pricing-wise has skyrocketed. So now you've got all these and people aren't building more. So you've got all this pent-up demand, right? And people need the space. So what do? They pay more for it, right? So now instead of this 10-year lease, which 10 or 15 used to be the gold standard, I would say. Now they want a 3 to 5 year lease. And you're like, man, why would somebody, like, if you can buy a building and not worry about it for the next 15 years, why wouldn't you, right? Well, in 3 years, if inflation keeps going the way that it's going, which I don't have a crystal ball, right? Like, I can't know. Charlie Munger would ask you, like, hey, what do you think is going to happen to inflation? and that's Charlie Munger asking you, right?
Yeah.
Like, nobody knows. And in 3 years, well, what if inflation is 10% and you're locked into a 15-year lease? Now your building is super undervalued. So I think the gold standard right now is a 5 to 7 year lease, still pretty standard. And it depends on the type of property that you're getting. If you want to sell like on a long-term triple net lease, so you've got like a Wendy's or an Arby's or, a retail kind of store, like you still want to get a 10, 15-year triple net lease. If you've got an industrial building, I think a 5, 10-year lease is still perfect. The difference in those might be 25, 50 basis points on a cap rate. But I think the only thing that's going to change, like I think people are seeing 5 and 10 years is kind of the same now. But 15 years is really what people are looking for. Like on that investment grade, AAA investment sales level.
And on those leases, because inflation and, appreciation is just kind of really pushed beyond the 3% at this point, are those percentages being adjusted over 3%, or people are still saying, we'll do 3% bumps, that's fine?
Yeah. So there's this crazy thing called like a CPI adjustment where they're like, we'll adjust your lease based on CPI as of XYZ date every year, right? But then the issues are like, if one person thinks CPI is this and one person thinks CPI is this, then you have to go get like an independent appraisal from you. Like this party has to get appraisal, this party has to get an appraisal, and a third independent party has to get an appraisal.
All for a lease adjustment.
Yeah, and then they can go in front of like a court and a judge, like a biased third party judge, like has to make a decision. Well, getting in front of a judge is gonna like. At that level, like when people write in CPI adjustments, like I almost exclusively cross that out. And I'm like, look, we're going to 3% or 2% or whatever it is. We really like right now kind of the shorter term lease game because we can go in, what we're seeing right now is most of these properties the lease hasn't been adjusted in a while. So you can go in and automatically get a 10, 15% bump. Yeah. When you renew that deal. So you can buy it at like a 8 cap and then turns into a 10 cap pretty quickly.
Yeah. What is your, cap rates are somewhat subjective to obviously area, but what's your kind of range of cap rate you're shooting for on a typical industrial space? We'll say 10 to 30,000 feet.
Yeah. It's kind of fun. Like, I'll tell a story. So you can sell something on a cap rate basis, but it could make still no sense. Like, I could sell you something at a 10 cap and it would make no sense. And you'd be like, how does that work? Mm-hmm. Well, if this tenant, let's say, signs a market lease that's 50% over market rate, and they just decide to shut down and they file bankruptcy or whatever to get out of the lease, then you're up a creek without a paddle because you overpaid on a per square foot, like your basis in the deal is too high. Does it make sense?
Yeah.
So, what we find a lot of the times in some of the deals that we've worked on, like I've got a client right now, actually, he's trying to sell a building. And I was like, dude, I can't sell this to you. You're 20% above market and you're asking for, you're in North Birmingham asking Pelham per square foot prices. And, with everything that's going on in North Birmingham, the amphitheater, all of that, it's going to be great. But the answer is not today, right? The answer is
5 years from now.
5 years, 10 years probably.
Yeah, I mean, it's going to the North Birmingham, there's a lot of momentum and a lot of things happening, but until it happens, it's like believe it when you see it.
Yeah. And, Birmingham's in a unique position right now. There's 3 potentially massive projects that could all come online within within 24 months of each other, which Birmingham can't sustain. If you had the North Birmingham project, the Brookwood Mall project, and the Hoover Galleria project all come online at the same time, like the Birmingham consumer wouldn't know what to do.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Well, I also think about on the construction side, would there be enough labor?
I think
to handle all of that construction.
I mean, if you've got Robertson Morton, you've got Brassfield and Gorey, the Brookwood Mall project is from an out-of-town group.
Yeah.
I think you'd be fine on the labor aspect of things. Some contractor, there might be some contractors for sale as they land these huge projects and their revenue shoots up.
Yeah. Or they bring in some extra people from outside in other areas that they need extra workers.
I had lunch with a banker yesterday who said, their pipeline is pretty full till the beginning of 2025 on the contractor side.
Right.
But then there's a steep decline, which no one's kind of talking about. And if you, I'm not saying we're in a recession right now, but
you heard it here. Sam calling it.
I mean, the consumer is hurting, and not in the ways you'd think. They're still want to take trips. They still want to do that. That's probably more of our generation thing. But hey, we're cutting back at the grocery store. Hey, we're cutting back here. You talk to any business owner right now, like they're kind of shaking in their boots, just trying to, because it's been so easy over the past 3 years, right? Like literally anybody with half a brain cell could have started a business in the past 3 years, and as long as you had some good systems in place, could have made money. Yeah. And now it's like, oh, we actually have to learn.
We got to do business. Yeah.
Like you can't just be Joe Schmo contractor or leave Brassfield and Gorey and start your own GC and like make money anymore.
Yeah. I would agree. And I mean, CPI just came out and the numbers said that the Fed's not going to be lowering rates because, inflation has not decreased. Right. And so I think it's interesting because we are such a consumer commodity buying economy. And I'll be honest, there's a socioeconomic and just like a mindset thing that once you reach this level of like, I can buy these things and I have this regular purchasing power, that doesn't go away just because the price of bread went up. Like your expectation of what you eat, your expectation of what you can buy for fun, all these different things. So there's a curbing of that appetite. And I just think that America as a general whole is not okay with it. And they're still buying at rates that is outside of their means, honestly.
So one of my favorite restaurants, and I think the best, this is my hack to the economy, is Longhorn Steakhouse. Because when times are good, look at the demographic that goes to Longhorn Steakhouse. It's the large family that maybe is from the up and coming part of town, and they've got their whole family there. They've got balloons. They're partying it up. When the economy is bad, then you get the higher end middle class, upper middle class consumer eating there. How do I know this? Well, we went through a boom and bust growing up. We had the highest of highs and the lowest of lows. And we were that upper middle class consumer that never stopped eating at Longhorn Steakhouse. But I watched my whole life the demographic of the people around me change. And so I still, every 2 weeks, go to Longhorn Steakhouse because I'm trying to keep a pulse on the economy. And you can literally watch like, oh, there's a new crowd in here.
Yeah.
Like, and I always sit at the bar, have my entire life with my mom. And we sit at the bar and I just talk to the bartender. I'm like, hey, what's the crowd been like lately? How have the tips been? They're like, man, like we were making so much money 6 months ago. Now, like people are leaving half tips. So when people stop tipping, that's kind of that lifestyle. That's that crest. They're like, I still want to eat good food. I can't tip as much.
Yeah.
And then you start to, go back and forth on it, right?
Yeah.
It's
or I saw my regulars. I don't see them as much anymore.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I think our generation is so real, as much as we are this, like our generation has so many relationships with people at restaurants and things, like it's going to be hard. Like I go to Olive Branch over in Cahaba Heights like all the time. Like if I had a hit to my income, like there's no way I can stop going there. Like I love going there.
Yeah,
the food is so good. I love talking to the same people. They know my order. Like it would be hard for me to adjust, right?
Right.
Now I eat out every meal. Like I hate cooking, so that probably will change now that I'm married. But,
yeah.
So I think the consumer and the business owner right now are both in limbo. Which going back to commercial real estate, there's nothing for sale. Also in the residential world, there's nothing for sale. Everybody's kind of at a pause. Leasing activity is still really, really strong. There's a lot of businesses that are looking to make moves. In the retail world, they're saying 2024 is the year of leasing already leased space because you've got bigger conglomerates coming in saying, hey, we want to take over this lease. So if you've got a shopping center with a local tenant in it, right? But then you get Lowe's, Home Depot, Best Buy, some big company, and they're like, hey, we want that space. Well, then that landlord is going to be like, can I buy you out of your lease so I can get Home Depot in here? Or Home Depot is probably a bad example, but like a good consumer brand.
Right. Talk me through. I don't know much about this. I know you have national, rated brands who like a Home Depot. If they want to rent your space, they're backed by a couple dollars.
A lot of dollars.
A lot of dollars, right? So that's a very secure tenant. When they sign on the dotted line, they are rated at a certain place. Mom and pop, who only have one location and are opening up a second location, don't have that backing. What are those ratings, and kind of how do y'all break that apart when it comes to leases and kind of risk reward?
So those ratings are typically related to their stock security, meaning so like if you're a AAA corporate guarantee tenant, right? That it means you're probably an S&P 500 company, so you're one of those top killers, right? What's interesting though, and what we found is those leases take a lot of time, right? You got to work through a lot of corporate, a lot of legal. There's a lot of expenses around that.
Yeah. And they have more leverage in the lease.
Yeah, really they do because they're a huge brand name.
Yeah.
We had a deal where a massive empty warehouse that we bought, rehabbed, and we were leasing it out. And the only time that they don't really have leverage is when you're the only, it's like being the really pretty girl at prom. Like when you're the only guy in town, like they kind of have to go with you. So we were able to get like 15% above what we were pro formaing on our rent because we were like, take it or leave it.
Right. You had the leverage.
Yeah. And there were, we had a couple people looking at the building. So that always helps. But I guess what I'd say is people look at these like big brands and they're like, hey, this is the best tenant I could ever have. And then they look at the mom and pop and they're like, I don't know. I'm kind of contrarian, and I would say the people around me are contrarian, and like we love the mom and pop because that small business owner, like if he doesn't show up to work, like he's not eating, kind of thing, right? Mm-hmm. It's the same investment thesis as workforce housing. Like those people are going to pay rent because if they don't, they're either going to lose their Section 8 voucher or they're literally out on the street. Like there's not a lot of option for them, right? In the same way, the mom and pop tenant, like they're going to pay their rent because if they lose their building, their business stops typically. So we kind of think the mom and pop tenant is a little more secure actually. Now you have to vet those people more on a relational basis. It's instead of, hey, our attorneys are going to work through these specifications in the lease documents. It's can I get 3 character references, on our leasing application, or you call, you get a letter from your bank saying you're good for this, and you call that bank because you probably have a relationship with them and say, hey, is Johnny good for it, and things like that. Is he a good tenant? Does he pay the bank note on time? Things like that. And if you figure that out, you're like, that's probably a pretty good tenant. Yeah,
he did like. Do they show up to work? Do they, when they're contracted to do work, do they show up on time?
Yeah, it's just their resume.
Viable business that they're running.
I always will do, like if we're going to lease to a business, right? Like I'll just act like that business, like I need that. So if, we're going to lease to a pest control company, I'm going to call that pest control company and say, hey, can you come out and service my house? I want to know how their services, because if they are late and do a crappy job, then other people aren't going to pay for them, right? Have you seen the show Billions? With
I don't think I've seen
Rod, Axelrod, or whatever.
Yeah, I haven't, but I'm familiar.
I'm not supporting the show. I'm not shouting it out or anything. But in I was watching on the plane back, and in one of the first episodes in the very first pilot season, he orders a bunch of equivalent of moon pies or whatever, and has everybody in his office try them. And they're like, you grew up eating these. How do they taste now? They're like, they taste like crap. So he's like, I'm shorting the company. And it's so true, right? If the product isn't good, then that company's going to go through financial distress. Mm-hmm. And that's not who you want in your building.
Yeah.
And people don't think like that. They're like, oh, I've got this tenant. It's like, okay, great. How are they actually going to make money? They're a business. And you said earlier, you like leasing more to the residential side. You think, hey, they've got to be there. That's their house, right? I think more on the business side. I'd rather have somebody hustling to grow their business because I know, they're incentivized by their own greed, right? Adam Smith, founding father of economics, would say it's not from the benevolence of the butcher or the baker or the benevolence of the butcher or the baker that you get your bread, but it's out of one's own self-interest or own self-greed. Meaning, they don't supply you meat because they think, oh man, you're a great guy. They supply you meat because they can make money off of it. And that's the same thing. I think industrial, commercial, real estate is good because they're paying their rent because they know they can pay their rent and make more money. They think it's a deal, right?
Yeah. Well, and in the end too, you're dealing with someone who already owns a business, and not to say that they're, have everything in their life figured out, but they figured out some part of it to run a business. And so they're probably a little easier to deal with than maybe a C-class tenant, for a personal, which I've experienced. There's difficult sides of the residential for sure. Talk me through when we were talking offline, and I love this concept. You said you help a lot of clients kind of think through their mistakes and unwind their mistakes and think through deals critically and help them process. What are some of the key factors that you help people walk through, and like some of those gatekeeper things of like, are you thinking of it this way? Are you thinking of it this way? That helps them really vet a deal. And then, I have a second part of that question, but I'll let you ask that first. Yeah.
So I think I break it down into three things. I think it's really simple. And it's, hey, what makes a great deal? And you've got to have a motivated seller, a short time frame, and there's got to be something wrong with the property. And where people get in trouble is they get in these, like over the past 4 years, right? People have just gotten in bidding wars, like, oh, I need to put this capital work. And, I know a lot of people who are getting just as much as they are on their money in the bank today as they were when they bought the 5.5 cap 2 years ago, right? And so it's like, one, you do nothing. Two, you have at minimum have to file a K-1 and pay your accountant $5,000 to get that done, right? So it's like, this doesn't really even out. And I'm sure someone would throw in the comments like, what about the tax benefits, blah, 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 like the trolls online. But I think it's really important because if your seller isn't motivated, then, they're like, this is my price and I'm sticking to it. Or if there's not a short time frame, right? Like they don't need that cash pretty quickly, then they're going to go shop those offers around. They're going to think about it. And do you follow the strip mall guy?
I don't think I do on him.
He's like a huge
on TikTok or whatever.
Yeah. Well, he's like on LinkedIn and Twitter and all that. But he says, don't buy a building hoping that it'll appreciate. Buy a building and force appreciation, right? Do something to actually add value to the building. Yeah. And that's what I think, when there's something wrong with the property, whether it's got an aquifer on it or it needs a new roof or new HVAC, or maybe there's some title. Like my favorite deals to work on are the deals with title issues, because one, you're really not doing anything. You're just quarterbacking attorneys to like work through this stuff. You want me to tell a story about our title issue?
Yeah, let's hear a title issue story. A good old classic title issue story.
Good old classic title issue. So we were buying this deal. It was a home run. It was a warehouse over on the west end of town. And we went to buy it. And they were like, hey, the person who owns this, and this deal had everything. So motivated seller, her husband was about to die. They needed the money before he died because there was like complicated appropriate how the transfer of stuff would work. And so very motivated, very short time frame. And this title issue was, the building was super dilapidated, but this title issue was horrendous. Somebody like 4 owners ago had sold the building out from under his grandma, and the building was in his grandma's name. Well, this person had burned somebody to death.
Golly.
And was imprisoned for that. And so he was in jail in Tennessee. So we had to hire an attorney, not one of the corporate attorneys, like a grease back hair, cheap $100 suit attorney.
Better call Saul attorney.
To go to this prison to try to find out how we could get clear title. This guy was like, oh yeah, that title is in my mobile home. We're like, where's that? He's like, oh yeah, if you go in the top drawer of this mobile home, and he's been in prison, mind you, for like 10 years. He burned somebody to death.
Wow.
So this attorney gets the SWAT team, no lie. And they bust up in this mobile home full of just like drugged out folks. The filing cabinet's still there. And they open it. After 10 years, this title is still there.
Dude, in a mobile home.
Takes it back to the jail. Gets the guy to sign it. And brings it back to Birmingham. Now we have clear title. That whole thing cost us like $3,000. But now we've got that building. My client was able to turn and make. It was a $100,000 building. Put $100,000 into it, and we sold it, and he made almost $300,000 off of it.
Wow.
And it's like,
but you found solutions to a problem that a lot of people would be like, oh, I can't figure out title. I don't know how to get it, or oh, he's in prison. End of story. Let's move on to the next deal.
So many people stop at they get to a door and they stop. It's like, well, most doors are unlocked. You just have to put your hand on it and open it. is what I found.
Man, that's so good. Going back to the time thing, I actually had a deal in Gardendale that motivated seller, but time was they did not have a specific time. And so I made an offer on it and it just wasn't at the price they wanted. And so I could close in 2 days, I could close in 2 weeks, I could close whenever they wanted, but for them, it didn't matter. They just, price was the most important. And so they ended up getting like, I would say 30K more, which I think the person, whoever bought it, overpaid, in my opinion, because I walked the property.
Who's the lender? We'll go buy it, yeah.
But it's interesting because that time is so key because you're present with them. You're providing a solution of not only convenience, but a time-effective solution. And sometimes that's not what someone needs, and so that's fine, but that's where you're going to find you make your money is on the buy.
Yeah. I think a lot of the times you just touched on it, owner users versus tenants or investors. Owner users will always pay more. So we find that in commercial to be true as well. Like this guy, I presume the person who bought this one in Gardendale is an owner user, right? They're probably going to go in there, do the work themselves, and live in it for the next 15 or 20 years. Commercial people are the same way. Like these companies are like, we have to be here, so we're just going to pay whatever for the property. And that bugs the heck out of me because when you have an owner user go buy a property, the investor down the road is like, well, this traded for, $150 a square foot. Now my property is for $150. And you're like, oh my God.
Yeah. Well, because they don't have to make the money per se on the rental side of it. They just got to make the business money.
Yeah, exactly.
And the same thing is true like flipping versus even, those differentials are true, flipping versus even someone who's looking to rent it out.
Yeah.
Because I could see that Gardendale property. I needed to make, $30K to make it worth the margins. But someone who's like, I just need to push money away, and if I could be at not even 1% in Gardendale, I'm happy, and so they could potentially buy it, at 75 to 80. I don't know who paid 98 for it. That's far beyond what I would do, because the RV was like 140, maybe 145, and it needed a good bit of work.
It's also fascinating to me. There's house flippers out, and this is more your space. Like there's house flippers out there who will buy deals that don't make money just to keep their crews busy.
Yeah, that does happen a lot. And I don't want to say even in slow times, it's like if it's a break even, or some guys I know I've talked to, they'll take on heavier lifts, so to keep and it's not even necessarily that they have like an electrician on staff. Most people don't, but they do have guys that wire / they could have a relationship that they're usually giving this electrician, will say $80,000 of work every year. Well, if they're sub that 80, they want to have that guy pick up the phone every time they call and make them a priority. They'll take on projects just so that if it's a break even, it puts money in their electrician's pocket, and then he picks up the phone when they call.
There's a guy, you want to talk about questioning your life? There's a guy who works for big 1099 guy, works for, kind of same thing, house flipper, works for a bunch of big multifamily people in town, just cleaning out apartments for, like, on flips. Mm-hmm. Dude made $250,000 last year.
Just cleaning out places.
Literally just
trashing out.
Running around. Like, he's got an old truck. He just goes in there, got a couple friends help him out. They move couches out or whatever, and they go throw it at the dump. $250,000, bro.
That's crazy.
I'm like,
hustling,
dude.
Yeah,
and so they tried to put him on payroll, and he was like, "Why would I go on payroll? You can't pay me what I made last year."
Yeah.
I couldn't imagine that. Imagine like
I bet they wanted him on payroll.
Yeah, imagine being a multifamily company and you're like a manager and you're like, "Hey, we want to add in a $250K, employee." They're like,
yeah, that's crazy. Well, it would be interesting why they don't just hire that. Obviously they're trying to, but there is some flexibility that they can, if things tank, they don't have to pay someone. Yeah. But go through, let's talk a little bit about the lending side of these deals.
Yep.
The structure. What have you seen, in the shift of, COVID, super low interest rates? Now we're in higher interest rate market. I still say historically not the highest we've seen.
Yeah.
I'm not saying I'm super happy about, the last raises, 7%, 8%, where we're at roughly, but what has been the lending sources? Have they shifted? What are types of loans compared to probably some people who are in the residential space or do single family home investing are kind of more used to those? Are there DSCR loans for commercial stuff, or is it just straight commercial loans, all that kind of stuff?
Yeah, great question. So one of the wealthiest guys I know, I called him one day and was just like complaining, like, how am I supposed to do deals with 7, 8, 9% interest rates? He's like, well, son, I built my first office building in Tuscaloosa, Alabama with a 18% interest rate. And we came out on top after it. And now look at me. And I was like, all right, that's humbling. If you can build an office now, back then you could build an office building for like 2 pennies and a sparrow, right? Like construction pricing was, but I'm sure that was a big risk back then too.
Yeah.
So I don't think interest rates should stop you from doing deals, but lending has definitely tightened. I think where most people go wrong in the commercial real estate space is they don't have enough lending relationships. I think most bankers say that they're good about meeting people getting out in the community, but most are not. It's so hard, in my opinion. It took me 3 years to build a relationship with 25 banks in town, right? And now now that I have those relationships, and they all move around all the time. So bankers just flip. They're just like baseball players. They just go to different teams all the time. And so in the real estate lending world, typically they're going to want to know, you're going to have to put your personal financial statement out there. They're going to want to see 3 years of tax returns, all of that. But it really is a relationship game. So if you've done it once or twice with another bank, or you have some sort of a track record, and then you go to another bank. So you go to A bank and then you go to B bank and ask for a loan. Right now is a very interesting time. If you want to get a riskier deal done, go to the banks that you have worked with in the past. They're super comfortable with you. They're like, hey, we trust you. But right now, if you've got just a down the fairway deal, hey, this is a good deal, this is a long-term hold, it's not a new ground up development or something, then you can go to Bank B and say, hey, and they're like, yes, we want to do this deal because we want your business. Right now, it's there are big shifts happening in the banking space if we're winning new clients away from other banks. So right now is a great time. Bankers are really hungry for deals. A lot of them coming out of 2023 was a slower year for them. And right now bankers are hungry for deals. So you can go get lunch with almost any banker in town right now. They are back to responding. In 2023, bankers were taking 6 weeks to evaluate a deal. They were just slow. They didn't really have a whole lot going on, but they were just slow. Everybody had made so much money in 2022 that they were kind of like, whatever, we hit our quota already. And still in the beginning of 2023, they had some big deals closing. Yeah. Now they're calling when the bank starts calling you hey, what opportunities you have? Hey, what opportunities you have? Hey, what opportunities you have? You're like, oh, okay, we could really lend. And they're definitely less aggressive. They're not going to take on the risk. I would hate to be a new sponsor, unfortunately, trying to buy a deal. But a lot of people also think, and I think this might have been you talking about this or somebody else, they were a client at Chase or Regions or PNC. And they were like, hey, I want to buy this rental. Those are the worst banks to go to. Those big banks, they don't 100%. Want to deal with you. They want to deal with Coca-Cola. They want to deal with, O'Neill Steel. They want to deal with the big heavy hitters. What your community bank is perfect for is these small commercial deals. When I say small, I mean $1 to $10 million in deals, even down
just
to
a few mil.
Yeah. Down to even, 200. The deals I typically play in are $500,000 to $2 million.
Yeah.
And the community banks love that space, right? It's just bread and butter for them. So if you're going to buy it vacant, then you're going to need more equity. That's what we call a value add deal. You're going to probably need 30 to 40% down today. If you've got a leased deal, interest rates are going to be typically north of 8% right now. So that means to have positive leverage, you're going to have like a 9 or 10 cap, which is where we get in this bid-ask spread gap where that's why deals aren't transacting right now.
Yeah.
It's like we had a wonderful deal just blow up because the only way that we could get the debt. So one of the credit products out there is like a credit swap. So they go basically swap against an interest rate. And as long as you hold that note to completion, then you don't lose any money. But you can be in or out of the money. So I'm pretty sure I'm getting this right. If you do a swap and interest rates go up, then you are out of the money, and I think you have to pay. But if they go down, you're in the money, and the bank actually pays you.
Okay.
But that's only like if you have a 5-year term and
Right.
you wanted to sell the property in year 3 or something like that. So they're very risky. That's like for very sophisticated investors. Another thing that people are doing right now is CMBS debt, which is government-backed debt. Those are typically on bigger retail deals. Kind of those like corporate tenants that we were talking about. But that allows you to take off recourse. That allows you to go a little higher loan to value, things like that. But it takes a long time. There's a lot of headaches. And don't you dare default on that debt because it'll be a nightmare to unwind.
Yeah.
Because you're dealing with the government.
Yeah.
So I would say the safest right now has not changed. Community banks. Mm-hmm. People freak out. Birmingham is a big multifamily town. Like there are some heavy hitting big multifamily developers in town, and they're struggling to get debt because banks don't have the liquidity for $50 to $100 million loans like they used to.
Yeah.
But the market that I play in, again, $500 to $10 million space, like the banks are like, let's go.
They can still lend.
Yeah,
in
we
those
can
pockets.
still lend there.
Yeah. Going back to that, you say it's a big multifamily space, but I feel like there's not a crazy amount of multifamily compared to other markets.
Yeah.
Demographically, we're not landlocked, or everything doesn't have to be downtown. People actually sometimes like land, so there's definitely multifamily, but not like Boston. There's some markets that are just crazy amount of multifamily.
So I guess when I say we're a big multifamily market, like you throw if you were going to get into the commercial real estate space, like there's probably 10 big multifamily developers in town.
Yeah. Okay.
Like people move here for multifamily development jobs, right? And I would say that like we had one was number 14 biggest multifamily developer in the country here in Birmingham, Alabama, right?
Really?
Yeah.
Okay. Gotcha.
There's other companies. There's a couple big real estate players. Like in Atlanta, there's a group that is known for retail development. Like when you say like, oh, I talked to this one guy in our office, and he's like, if they pass on it, like there's no way you're going to see a deal before them. That's how many retail pads they've looked at. Then there's a multifamily group of town. Like if they've passed on land, there's something wrong with it.
Wow.
And like people will call them and be like, hey, why aren't you guys doing this deal? Or are always trying to JV with them and things like that. So
interesting.
There's some really good multifamily developers in town. Like, I don't want to shout out anyone in particular.
Is there more coming online, you think, in the next?
I would be very afraid to be bringing multifamily online in Birmingham.
Why is that?
Have you driven downtown lately?
There's a lot of. Candace Pilgrim came in and she said that the downtown area had a surplus of like 30 or 40% more than the previous year coming online in the next year and then another year.
Downtown is interesting. Have you driven around downtown lately?
Yeah, I've driven it some. I've always thought downtown's interesting because we have some revitalization, but it's in pockets. Like if I were to ask you, hey, where are like the up and coming areas, you could probably name off like 10 pockets
Sure.
of development, but they're not attached to each other. They're like you have to drive to each one.
Yeah.
And I've always thought that was interesting. There's no like hub. Like Denver, where I'm originally from Colorado. So Denver, Colorado has like 16th Street Mall. There's like a lot of retail there and everything and then also you have the stadium. So there's just these hubs that kind of everything sparked from as far as development goes. And Birmingham is just very segmented.
Yeah.
I think the stadium could be starting to becoming that like central hub, but it's still in development.
So going back to my earlier comment of like there's some business owners that are shaking in their boots and the consumers shaking in their boots. Like go drive around downtown. We're in May 2024 for people listening to this podcast later. Like it's scary down there right now. Mm-hmm. Like a year, 2 years ago, like it was popping. Like people wanted to be there. There were businesses. It was thriving. Like right now, like it's kind of scary. Mm-hmm. And when I say downtown, most people in Birmingham consider downtown anything over the mountain.
Yeah. Like that bigger. You're just saying restaurants aren't as populated.
Yeah. And I break, so I would say downtown is north of the railroad tracks, and I would call Midtown south of the railroad tracks. Mm-hmm. There's a bridge that everybody goes and takes pictures on. Yeah. Railroad Park is on the south side for reference for everybody. Yeah. The south side was booming because of UAB, and I think it's still pretty stable. The north side was getting a lot of development and is a little scary right now. There are still a lot of groups taking on risk and putting new deals and everything down there. Again, this is just my personal opinion. Like, I wouldn't want to own an office tower downtown. Yeah. But if you look at from the Midtown market to basically 459 past the Colonnade, like go out that way, like the office market is full. Like I think they said that there's 10% of the office buildings in our country make up 60% of the vacancy. Think about that.
That's crazy.
Yeah, that was by JLL, so not a Colliers.
Yeah.
But it's crazy to think about. Like there's these huge towers that are basically empty, and then every other office is basically full.
Yeah, I wanted to bridge that gap and ask you about office spaces, because obviously you don't play in that space specifically, but you have a lot of people in your brokerage that do.
Yeah, I mean, Colliers is the number one office brokerage company in the state. I mean, we lease, manage, own more office than anybody else.
So are you guys seeing a regression in those massive office buildings, and then the smaller stuff is just packed, basically?
Yeah, a lot of the smaller stuff is packed, is leased, is super stable. There's been some guys in our office who have crushed it, kind of filling up some suburban towers, actually. And the downtown towers are performing. There have been some big leases that have been signed. I would say office leasing is still really, really strong. Like those guys are slammed. They kill it. They're some of the best producers in our office. And, those deals just take a lot longer, and you don't know that they're going on, right? Like you drive by a new multifamily development, you know it's going on. You drive by a vacant office building, unless you're intuitive and you're like, it's Tuesday at 10 a.m. and there's no cars in the parking lot, you don't really know what's going on, right?
Yeah.
We own an awesome office in the Midtown market right there at 280 and 31, the Truist building. And that building has stayed leased. It's performed super, super well. But you got to think about the fundamentals of that building. The only difficult part of that building is it can be somewhat difficult to get to, on those access roads with all the construction they're doing in Mountain Brook right now. But besides that, like
location,
the three first rules of real estate that they teach you.
Yeah, it is an interesting thing. I had Mark Hancock in here a while ago, and he does some kind of individual office space
his
leasing.
has crushed it.
he's got a wait list, and he's looking at bringing another one online. He's looked at retrofitting. He said, we were talking about it, and there was a deal where he could have bought something for well below market value. But the retrofit just didn't create the aspects. And going back to location, he was like 3 miles down the road from where it should be. And he's like, those are subtle things that just like when you're putting a lot of money on the line, you got to hold true to what you know. And he was like, I just didn't do the deal because it just was marginal, and it could have maybe worked, but there's a lot of things that said it couldn't have worked.
People don't like getting on an elevator anymore.
Yeah.
So if they have to get on an elevator, or they have to walk, like they can't pull up and walk in, they don't want the space. Like, and that's really how we evaluate it. Like,
Interesting.
Like if you can't park and just walk into your office, like most people don't like it. That's why Mark's stuff has performed so well. If you go to all his stuff, you just walk in, it's right there, and you're in your office. Another thing, and this is a developer told me this one time about Birmingham, was Alabamians hate parking garages.
Really?
For some reason, like the deals that are attached to parking garages or have parking in the parking garages, like have not gone well.
It's funny because like I think about the elevator, I think about the high rises, you're talking about parking garages. If you lived in New York City, or I mean any heavily populated, very downtown, these are assumed.
Yeah.
These are just the way of life. And it's marginally where sometimes you don't have to choose that here. So why? I don't want to go to an office space with a parking garage, so I'm not going to. I'm not going to have my office there. And in, we'll say Boston, that's not an option if you want to be anywhere close to where business is happening. But here you can be in other places.
In Boston and New York, though, like it's also commonplace to not own a car.
That's true too. Yeah.
So like you got to think about the difference in lifestyle. Like I drove 20 minutes to get here this morning. Everything in Birmingham is less than 20 minutes away, right?
Yeah.
It's amazing. If you went to somebody in New York and were like, oh, I drove 20 minutes this morning, they either think you like drove halfway around the block, or they're like, wait, why do you own a car?
Yeah.
There in Birmingham, they don't, or in New York versus Birmingham, like they don't have to have parking. Like, tell me the last time you saw a parking deck in New York City. You probably didn't see one, right?
But they do have to use elevators.
Right?
There's no option there.
That makes me think of Home Alone, where Kevin is just like getting in the elevator and going up. So I think those cities are a little different.
Yeah.
You don't have people in New York commuting, from Greystone to downtown, right?
Yeah.
But we also don't have like a good subway system. Which is honestly a blessing. Like, I'm from Atlanta, and in Atlanta, they move the subway. Whenever they move MARTA out, it comes with a lot. Like, people are kind of nervous because the theft can increase, the crime can increase, because you're connecting more of the city. My mom tells stories about growing up in Atlanta, and she said, like, when MARTA came out to where she was like just a little north of Buckhead at the time or something. People would they knew like every day when when the train was going to run, and the theft was timed with that. So like she was like, you can never get on the bus at say 3:35 in the afternoon or whatever, because the train's going to come this way, and this store manager does his shift change at that time. So someone would steal something, hop over the thing, get on MARTA, door would close, and they'd be gone.
Wild.
And it's like, those are things that, when you're trying to do better for your city by putting in transportation, like you don't think about that stuff.
Yeah, that's crazy. You were telling me, this is a little bit shift to pace back to some of the stories, but you were talking about a deal that had a huge spread because the property was bought based on the business and not the property value. Tell me more about that one.
So I think one of the things that we do well is having a perspective, like looking at our perspective on deals, and then truly understanding the value of what's there, right? A lot of people, due to low interest rates, right? thought they could get in the business on the real estate side, on the business side, whatever, and think they could do well. Well, we found a deal that a business was for sale. And it was a small automotive business, and the business was worth essentially nothing. And so it was valued as such. It was an all-cash business. It's like, hey, man, how do you value a business that you can't verify how much money it makes? He's like, oh, it makes, $10,000 a week or whatever. You're like, dude, I can't verify
I can't
that.
underwrite that.
Yeah, like, I need proof. I'm like, do you have bank statements? He's like, you want to come check out my safe? No, not really. Like, I don't trust you that much.
Oh, man, that's funny.
So, went online, found it, and I saw that it had real estate associated with it. And instantly it was like, evaluated the real estate. You could close down the business, right, lease out the real estate, and it would be a 20 cap. Just as is, done. And so, talk about motivated seller. This guy had worked on the same street for 60 years. He'd never been north of Coleman or west of Tuscaloosa. So he was like, I'm done. I'm here to retire. Like, get me out of this. So, and the real estate was obviously misvalued. It was tied up in the business. So it was like, there's your hair on the deal, right?
Yeah, 100%.
And we bought that business. It had no employees, so that was easy to deal with. And, basically, when I say shut it down, people are like, you shut down a business? You're horrible. We basically took the phone number off the hook and took out the sign and put up a for lease sign and leased it out within, a couple weeks, and had a great real estate deal on our hands. Understanding value like that business broker didn't understand the value of the real estate, just like most real estate people wouldn't understand the value of a business, right? Like if like someone brings us their business, we'd be like, I don't know how to value this, right? Business guys are like, I know cap rates. What the heck is an EBITDA multiple?
Yeah. It is interesting in this space, especially the pivots and the way you can structure it. The creativity expands not just in the financing, but also in the case use more than single family, I think, can be. Because you can pivot, you can adjust, you can rebuild, you can restructure and create different values for different types of businesses. Single family, for the most part, the value is in the fact that it provides a home for someone.
Yeah.
There is some pivoting, don't get me wrong. You can kind of rezone sometimes. Sometimes you can rezone a lot that currently has a single family home and realize that, hey, it's really close. We could be rezoned to multifamily. Well, then all of a sudden you pivoted, but that would go back, actually, you're reclassifying something as single family residential and reclassifying it into the commercial world.
Yeah.
So the commercial world just has a lot of different case uses that you can be more creative, which is really exciting.
Homewood actually has, you talked about Homewood earlier, like Homewood has some really interesting zoning. Mm-hmm. And I know this because my buddy owned a house and got a commercial offer on it because someone wanted to buy it for their office building. And it had a residential and office use zoning. Think about that.
Yeah.
It's like, man, and the broker that bought him the deal is really smart, because if you could check out all the zonings and say, hey, like, that is in that zoning, and there's a discrepancy, right? Like, if you're paying, like $140 a square foot for residential, but then office is paying $200 a square foot, like, there's that found value in there, right? Those numbers weren't true. There's nothing trading it for $140 a foot in Homewood.
It's like, I want that deal.
Yeah, anybody would be lining up to take that deal.
Yeah. No, it is true. My current single family home, it's a tri-level, and it's in Homewood, and the goal, we'll see if it ends up happening, but the goal would be to rent by room to Sanford students. Okay. And what's interesting about the layout is it basically has a bathroom. It has a common space because the tri-level, setup, you have 3 bedrooms upstairs. We don't actually have a master bath, but we have a common,
bathroom.
bathroom,
Yeah.
right? So then effectively that bathroom becomes the bathroom for the three. And then down below, we could turn into 2 bedrooms, and there's another bathroom down below. So you could have 5 bedrooms basically and a common space area. Like, it's perfect for this setup. Now, there are some rules.
Yeah,
in Homewood.
as a Sanford student, every Sanford student will know what I'm about to say, but there's a brothel rule.
Yeah, you can only have 3 people of different
Families.
last names.
Yeah.
So I have to find some sisters.
Which they do. There are a ton of twins at Sanford. Holy crap.
So, but all that to say is like, even thinking of that is like a pivot on that property is, and I don't know if it'll happen or not, but it's an interesting thing of like thinking outside the box, basically.
And that's what do you know what landing is?
Yeah.
That's what Landing's whole company is based on, is finding arbitrage in a, renter that is transitional, meaning that they want to spend 3 months in Chicago, 3 months in Birmingham, 3 months in New York, and move around so they can set up a lease that way. Just like you've got that short-term rental that probably is to like nurses or like people like that. I think that's a genius idea. I've got another buddy who does that as well, and he kills it over in Tuscaloosa. Finding pockets like that where you can be close to like medical stuff or things like that is fascinating to me in the single family world. I know a kid in Thomasville, Alabama, who just bought a house close to the hospital and rented it out on a short-term rental. And at closing, he's like 18 years old. At closing, because he already had the lease in place, got a check for like 25 or 50 grand or something.
Dude, that's incredible. I
was like, dude, if I knew that at 18, like
that guy's gonna be crushing it.
Yeah.
That's crazy. So as we wrap up, I always like to bring Birmingham specific knowledge. Office space doing really well. You're seeing some office space.
I would say 31,280 to 459 corridor in all directions, through Vestavia, through Mountain Brook Inn, everywhere. Awesome. Mm-hmm. Midtown market still really strong. You probably get a discount on some towers right now.
Right. So
you want me to
you
run
would
through?
say sub 30K square feet, basically, still very good. What are some other things, just to kind of wrap up what you're seeing in the commercial space in Birmingham market?
Yep.
Things that are good, things that are maybe struggling.
Yeah. So I'll run through them. The retail market, super strong. You got new people coming into the summit. Basically every retail space is leased out there. And people are, like I said earlier, it's the year of leasing unleased space. So they're just trying to get the best tenants and play musical chairs with all of those. There's obviously some retail areas that are struggling. Everybody would know, like, hey, like this market is, there's no one signing the lease, at the Galleria right now, right?
Yeah, I mean, both malls are not doing great.
Yeah.
And why is that?
People just don't want to go in malls anymore. So like the mall isn't doing good. Think about this parking garage, can't just walk in kind of idea that I was talking about earlier. The Hoover Galleria can't lease space inside. But go look at Costco. You tried to go to Costco lately?
It's nuts.
It's packed. So it's not that area is in the wrong area. It's just that the product is the wrong product, right?
Yeah, that's good.
Go look at Stadium Trace. You can walk. You literally park up and walk. That place is packed, dude. Like all those. We went there the other night on just a weeknight. It was packed. I was like, okay, dang, retail is humming, but you can't build more retail right now. It's $400 a square foot to go build out retail. So, I mean, you'd have to have a super high triple net rate to even make it work. I've seen triple net rates as high as $60, $70 a square foot. That not just in Birmingham, and that's some more QSR stuff. So like some quick service restaurants, like Wendy's, things like that. But I think the Lane Park project was like $40 or $45 triple net. Wow. I think the Summit was quoting $50 or $55, maybe $60 triple net. It's like that is insane. Don't hold me to those numbers. By the way. So retail office is good. Retail is good. Industrial. There was a time in Alabama where there was not enough Class A big box. So this is tilt up concrete construction deals. So a bunch of people are like, oh, I'm going to build a tilt up building and lease it out, right? That's kind of slowing. So the tilt up is a little slower right now. There's some vacancy in that just because there's not 100 to 500,000 square foot tenants really just hunting around the market, right? Sub 50,000 square feet, super competitive, nothing to buy, not even a lot of lease product. So we've got, that's a super, super strong market, very competitive. Multifamily has some pain. There's a lot of people that bought and their bridge debt's coming up, or they've got super low rates and the refi is going to hurt them, or rents have not grown, or occupancy's dropped. I would be really afraid if I had a new online multifamily deal coming online in Birmingham.
So specifically with vacancies, you're seeing there's vacancies coming out.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Like when multifamily developers start offering concessions, that there's some trouble.
Yeah.
But basically, if you look at cap rates and the cycle, values are back to where they were in 2018 and 2019. Mm-hmm. So when you buy at the top of the market, and then you get not historically high normalized interest rates, people are going to face some pain.
Yeah, the debt's coming up. Yeah, and I was talking to one of my bankers, and they're going to have to get creative with terms and trying to figure out some of these things. I was like, hey, are some of those coming due? And he's like, next year it's going to be interesting.
Yeah. And you can see a lot of that stuff, and it's not as drastic in Alabama as it is in other places. But you got to remember, like, banks are also publicly traded. And so banks don't want to take a hit, just like developers don't want to take a hit. So I've actually seen and heard of a lot of people being very flexible, more so than I thought. Extending amortizations, putting interest only on things. And it was pretty shocking to me. I'm like, man, like there's a lot of people that don't want to take a hit to their ego, right? Mm-hmm. Because they're worried about their job, or they're worried about how their own performance is, right? Mm-hmm. Like, I'm not saying that all banks and all developers are in that situation. There's a lot of them that are very smart, very healthy, and very set. But there are some.
There's pain coming.
There's pain. There's some pain coming. Yeah. The hotel market, I would say, is flat. There's some new hotels coming out by Barber Motorsports that I saw. There's some in Pell City and things like that. But I think the hotel market remains strong. I'm super excited for that one next to Bricktops on 280 to open. Mm-hmm. I think that'll be good. What else are we missing? We've got office, retail, multifamily, industrial, medical. Still really, really strong. Mm-hmm. I think medical will always remain strong.
Yeah.
Self-storage. I've actually seen an up from everybody I'm talking to. There's an uptick in demand, uptick in rates. Self-storage's big trick right now is $1 to rent a unit for the first month, and then they're jacking you up. Like by month 3 or 4, you're higher than what they used to be. So once they get you in there, they learned that once they get you in there, it's a good thing.
Yeah. Yeah, it's definitely one of those things where it's out of sight, out of mind, and you kind of build it into your budget, and then I would say even with self-storage, not everyone, but some of those it's just a task.
Yeah.
And your daily life gets going, and you're like, I can't get backed out to the unit to clear it out, to unrent it. Oh, we'll do it next month.
I think the average storage tenant, it stays for like almost 3 years.
Wow, that's crazy.
And so I tell my self-storage clients all the time, like, you have to answer the phone because every move-in is worth thousands. Every phone call is thousands of dollars.
Yeah.
Same thing with the I think one of the things that the real estate industry is thinking through right now is how do we constantly be solving problems? Meaning, like, how are we constantly answering the phone, even out of work hours? How are we, solving tenants? I was reading on Twitter this morning of some guys that their whole brokerage in Florida is just off SEO.
Oh, wow.
And they're getting leads left and right because people are not wanting to call brokers to go find that. They just want to search it on the internet.
Yeah.
It's like, we as commercial real estate brokers, as people helping tenants, helping clients, helping all of these people, like, we're going to have to adapt here pretty soon because the world is changing.
Yeah.
AI's helped our industry like mad. You can put together a flyer in, 10 minutes now, not 2 hours. So
pretty amazing.
Pretty awesome.
Well, Sam, this conversation has been very informative. I think we've covered a breadth of different areas, some philosophy of how to look at commercials, some in-depth like specifics about Birmingham. It's been a great conversation. If someone wants to work with you, interested in the commercial space, looking to buy some stuff, looking to sell some stuff, how do they get a hold of you?
Yeah, they can email me. You want to drop the email in the
the
comment,
or you can say now. That's fine.
Sam.Zoldock ZOLDOCK at colliers.com, or they can just call me 404-291-4684. So I still got that 404 number.
Yeah, man, rocking it. I'm originally from Colorado. I was rocking the 719 number for a long time. I think you still are, right? I changed it. I
couldn't remember.
Yeah.
But yeah, I would love to connect with anybody. I love buying people lunch, getting coffee, talking. So
that's awesome, man. Well, I appreciate the time, all the knowledge, and like I said, just thinking through deals in a creative and alternative form. It's fun to talk about because it gets my ideas going too, of like, what am I working on that, I think when you hang out with people like yourself, you get pushed to do that, and this has been one of those conversations that like I'm walking away from like, okay, what's my next step to like find something creative, because I've done some deals in the past that are very creative. We bought debt one time, and I'm just like, the energy that comes from a deal structure that's just outside the box is like, there's nothing like it. It's so fun.
I think putting together deals is one of the, that's literally why I love my job, is because, sometimes you cold call somebody and they're like, hey, screw off, right? Yeah. But then other times you call somebody and they're like, I have been praying for a solution, right? Yeah. And they don't know what to do. I was on the way here today. Guy called me back. He's like, hey, you called me 6 months ago and I wasn't ready, but now I came up with a solution to this problem. Well, we can do this deal. He's like, when can you close? And I'm like, well, I'm going on this podcast, but I can close after that.
Give me a few. I
need a few hours, but we can get this done.
That's awesome, man.
So,
very cool.
I really appreciate it. And I'm sure we're about to talk about some creative deals offline.
Yeah, man.
Here.
Let's do it. All right. Take it easy, man.
Thanks, fam.